In this video, I'm going to show you my entire process for converting this stylized illustration to 3D using Blender. To begin this process, I will start out by blocking this character. I start out by laying out blueprints for areas like the eyes, ears and limbs, and get a general shape figured out. I block out the head and the torso and shape them just a little bit. I don't go into any detail. I'm just creating a frame at this point. I'm not concerned about proportion at this stage because I can do that when I have a few or all shapes in place. This step involves the first two levels of anatomy, which are basic shapes and skeletal structure. After I have enough shapes, I can start to combine some of them together to make it easier to sculpt with, since it can be a little difficult to switch between pieces. It is easier to shape, resize and reposition separate parts and observe how the changes affect the overall form. Later, the separate parts can be polished using various modeling and sculpting tools. At this stage, I am trying to find the rough proportions of the shape of the model. Here, I keep the model as low poly and as clean as possible. I continue to add primary blocks that make up the body by adding the limbs. I am taking my time at this stage to ensure that I have the placements correct. It helps inform my decisions on other parts. Once I am done blocking out the lower limbs and feet, which are still separate, I move to the upper limbs. Notice that I don't complete the one area before moving to the next, but instead I go back and forth. Changes in one area inform modifications in other areas. I take a break from the limbs because I noticed that the head needed some adjustment. The adjustment to the head helped me to better understand the shape language of the character's pose. As soon as I have a clearer picture, I continue with the hands. I place a sphere where the palm is supposed to be and then shape it using mainly the move brush. I alternate between the brush and the edit mode in Blender to push and shape the various parts of the model. After placing the palm, I do the same for the fingers, which are placed one at a time. This character has a very simple shape, so the general form is quite basic. Because I choose to do the hand in pose, I had to sculpt them separately. This didn't prevent me from reusing the blocked out hands. To reuse the hands, I duplicated the blocks of the hand and mirrored the duplicates. I then rotate the duplicates together in edit mode until I find the optimal placement for them. I find it makes the process easier to use edit mode to do most transformations while sculpting. For one, it is easier to switch between sculpt mode and edit mode. Also, transforming in edit mode doesn't require the application of the transformations to the mesh. One of the invaluable tools in Blender is the remesh tool, which I use quite often while sculpting. I remesh parts where I want to add secondary detail using the remesh tool and then proceed with the detail. Because I still have some parts separate, I have the luxury of resizing and repositioning those parts very easily as I progress. If a specific proportion is not right, I just scale it. If the angle needs to be changed, I rotate it. If I need it to be repositioned, I do so. And I can use the gizmo, which is very intuitive to use. For the rest of the process, I go over all the details and look at the model from all angles and compare to my references to ensure that it looks good from all sides. After blocking out the hands and legs, I go over the entire model, shaping various parts and observing the overall shape language. I fine-tune the parts that I think are non-conforming to the overall structure as intended. I make sure to continually go back to areas covered while still adding new blocks like the tail. After the tail, I go back to the head and start to add more parts like the teeth. This character has a very distinct front teeth and also regular human-like back teeth. The front teeth is made up of two separate cubes, while the rest is just a simple cylinder. The rest of the teeth is not going to be very visible, so I don't spend much time on it. But they inform the shape of the mouth, which in turn informs the shape of the neck. I do a little more work on the face and the mouth since they affect one another. I add incremental details to them while observing how the changes affect the overall model. I ensure that I am constantly looking at the overall character so that I don't get tunnel vision on the parts that I am working on. Speaking of the mouth, I proceed to add the snout. I shape it and detail it immediately because of its simplicity and ease so that I don't have to come back to it later. I then add the eyes. I usually find the eyes to be quite difficult to get right immediately, and so I tend to delay it until I am confident with the structure of the face. In this case, I wasn't confident about the face until I had the whole body properly blocked out. This was because I didn't have a clear picture of the back of the head. I couldn't decide whether the head should be flat or very rounded. I played around with both ideas for a bit and settled for a rounded back head. The fundamental of digital sculpting is form. When you think about form, you need to think about layers. I start with the primary forms and then progress to the secondary form. Secondary form is just a form or layer on top of another form. That means an added level of detail on a block. Once I am satisfied with the primary details, I move on to the secondary ones. Using the brushes at my disposal, I add the secondary details, and because I did a proper block out earlier, this part becomes much faster. I am now at the final phase of the sculpting process. At this stage, I have completed most of the secondary detail. This concept doesn't require any tertiary detail because of its simplicity. So instead of taking a creative license to make up detail, I chose to give the character some form. One of the reasons I picked this concept was because of the form. It was a nice balance between ease and challenging. It was challenging because I had never done 4 before, but easy because it was stylized. I gathered some references about rabbits to help in this process. I've done a bit of stuff using Blender's hair particle system, and this was a perfect exercise for me. I first remeshed the mesh. I then grouped the mesh faces into various groups. I then add hair particles to the various groups and experiment with the hair parameters until it looked good. Afterwards, I groomed the hair by combing it, cutting it and growing it. Finally, I add textures to the hair. I repeat this process for other groups of faces as well as separate meshes, which includes the ears, the mouth, and the hands. If you've made it to this point in the video, I would like to say a big thank you. Do not forget to hit that like button if you enjoy this type of content. Also, subscribe and select the notification bell so that you can get updates whenever I post them. I intend to post a new one every week. I will appreciate your comments about my videos, as your comments will help me to create better ones and also let YouTube recommend my videos to audience like you. Here's the turntable result for this process. And a side-by-side comparison of the initial concept and the conversion result. Hope you like it, and see you in the next one.